There's a lot of fear, I think, in a B2B business about exposing product development to clients. It's a falsehood, but I do think that companies feel vulnerable if they show unfinished products to B2B clients. Like they'll see something that's not perfect and they'll say, well, that's not going to work for us. So we might, not be happy with them as a provider.
Hey, it's The Product Experience, and I'm Randy Silver. We all love stories about launching a hot new product, but for most of us, the job is to improve and transform the organizations that we work in. There's a lot of internal tooling, a lot of managing change, and rebuilding a plane that's already in flight. We sat down with Jo Wickremasinghe, Chief Product and Technology Officer at BPP, to talk about how she handles all of this. Jo, thanks for joining us on the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Randy. Yeah, another great day in London. Great to be at the Mind the Product conference today.
Yeah, and yesterday you were on stage at the Leadership Forum, and you talked about some really interesting things, which we're going to dig into in just a moment.
Okay.
But for anyone who wasn't at the Leadership Forum yesterday, just give us a quick introduction. What are you doing these days, and how did you get into product? What was your first product gig in the first place?
So I'm Chief Product and Technology Officer at a company called BPP Education. We have a history of about 50 years, but over the last 10 or so years, we've grown to cover all sorts of professional education. So it's people who have left university typically, although we do some university degrees. We have a mixture of B2B and B2C students and learners, both international and UK apprenticeships. So it's a really diverse education business, which is really interesting for me. And I've been there for 2 years. And how did I get into product? Well, so my first career, I'm an aeronautical engineer.
Oh, fantastic.
Aerospace, actually. It sounds a lot cooler to have the space in there. And I moved over to the UK in the late 90s, so quite a long time ago, from Australia. And I came over as an aeronautical engineer. And it's one of those things that you study it when you're young and you think it's going to be exciting. And actually, aeronautical engineer it's not very exciting. It takes 5, 10, 20 years to bring new products, new airplanes into the market. So it's very slow moving, and I got bored. And it was late 90s, first dot-com boom. I was an early adopter of technology, and I thought, I wonder how they decide what they do with this technology, and how do you decide the features that go into it? And that made me want to get into tech. So my first job was, early noughties, was I joined Microsoft, and I've been in the product space ever since.
Fantastic. So one of the things you were talking about yesterday, and the thing we wanted to dig deeper into, is how to make teams more successful. And it's not enough for a team to just simply put some code into production. There's more to it than that. And something that's come up time and time again, product managers, product people, product teams, we're change agents. Because we're building new features, we're building new products, we're bringing to market. And it's not just putting code into production. It is often changing the way the organization operates as part of it as well. Let's dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in my career history, I think having worked on a lot of B2C products and services, so direct to consumer, that's somewhat easier because it's a bit like you ship it and you get engagement, and if you can see the behavior and you can kind of tweak it, you don't necessarily need to really speak to the consumers directly, although you'll probably do that in some of your research and your discovery. But once it's live, you can see how it scales. So in a way, once you've got the product right, you've got the product right. And particularly if it's new and innovative, it's not like you're trying to necessarily sort of have to retrain somebody to use that. If it's intuitive, people will find their way. I think building products that are more internal or B2B typically as well, there can be significant change that you need to implement in order to make the product a success. And that's a big part of the work that we're doing in my current company. As I said, it's a 50-year-old business. And it's grown very quickly in the last 10 years. And a lot of that's through acquisitions and bringing in different programs have come through different institutions. They've all had their own technology. They've all had their own ways of working. But now we service clients across all of those different programs. And the clients want a sort of consolidated experience across all of that. And the learners want, if they're doing a program management module and they're doing an accountancy module, they don't want to have a completely different experience between those two. So we need to provide our customers with a seamless experience. But behind that is distinct systems, distinct admin groups, completely all working different ways. So my challenge is to build products and services that are going to become our global education platform in a way that is seamless, but bring all of those different user groups on the journey to adopt and make those new platforms really successful.
So it's really an iceberg, isn't it? You've got that 20% above the water of what the end user, the customer or the business user sees, and that huge chunk underneath of what do the internal teams use to actually make the business work.
And often, in the one major piece of work that we started early in this transformation process, there's 20, 30, 40 systems involved in delivering that experience to different user groups. And we want to streamline that down to, a handful of them. So it's a massive amount of change that's required in order for it to be successful. And it can be quite daunting to take that on, but yeah, it's been exciting.
How are you approaching it? What's been the biggest learning with the teams? I mean, you've done this for a while, but you've got lots of teams who may not have thought this way before.
Absolutely. And I think for me, it's just come from experience of that last mile is the bit where it all falls apart. So you'll do your discovery, you'll prototype, you'll test it with the end user. You might even test it with a selection of the internal users who will use it on the, the back end side, the back end operations people, and it all goes well. But then when you have to deploy that to thousands of students and hundreds of internal staff and make that successful, that's where it can really fall down. So one of the key things that we did was I've built a small team of people called product operations, and it's probably not a typical product operations that other organizations might have. The reason I've called them product operations and not change management is because we had other people in the organization called change management. I didn't want to confuse it anything, but really this team is responsible for the kind of go-to-market of these internal products, and that the people I've hired have real depth of experience in change management. And so they've brought skills like time and motion studies, things that I don't actually understand, like Little's law, which is like how operational workflows, you measure them, and then you can measure the impact of change on that. So a real kind of academic scientific approach to change management. And they've been instrumental in kind of mapping out the as is through time and motion studies and sitting and observing the internal teams before we start developing, and then doing kind of a scientific approach to forecasting what that change is going to look like, what that means organizationally in terms of efficiencies, and then how we need to roll that out to be successful. So that team has been instrumental in us being able to make this journey successful for the products we've worked on so far.
Are they working on the change itself, or are they working on the strategy? Are they helping come up with the OKRs or the goals for these things, or are they mostly doing the implementation of it?
So that particular team is doing the implementation. So I've sort of talked about the tail end, but if we go back to sort of the start, the inception of the particular So I'll if it works for you, I'll talk through this particular case study that we have.
Yes, please.
So I mentioned we have different types of users, so different types of learners. So we, in a very broad category, we have apprenticeships, which are UK-based learners that have a model of learning where they're both working and learning at the same time. So they do a lot of on-the-job training, but they're also doing their learning with us. Then we have traditional UK domestic university students like law students, and then we have international students. And so broadly, we would categorize our three types of user groups as international, UK, domestic, and apprentice. We used to have different application processes for each of those learner groups.
Right.
Again, distinct systems top to bottom, distinct teams managing them. That doesn't scale. And again, some of those learners will be cutting across from a client perspective. We'll have both domestic students and apprenticeship students. So we really wanted to create what I call the universal application experience. That was the mission. So our hypothesis to start, why do we want to do that? Well, we believe there's going to be efficiencies. One, you only need one tech team to support one system for the three different user groups. If you do it well, you could probably consolidate those admin teams into one Uber team, because actually, if you think about those different learner groups, when they're applying, it's sort of an 80-20 rule. 80% of what they're having to provide you for their application is the same. Your user profile, your academic history, your learning support needs, that's the same for every type of learner. So clearly one system would probably work with a few maybe bolt-ons for the uniqueness of the different users, students. So That was a hypothesis. And we believed, I think we started out saying we think we could achieve a 10% efficiency. What does that mean? Efficiency from our technology and efficiency from our teams. And that, again, could start to scare people in the organization, because when you say efficiency, they think job cuts.
Yep.
So that's barrier number one. The good thing about our business is we are growing massively. We're growing revenue year on year significantly. Our learner numbers are growing significantly. So it wasn't so much about we'd need to lay people off if we were successful, which is not a way to get, lots of positive interactions. But actually it was more about the fact that we could scale without having to hire more heads or much fewer heads. So it becomes much more of a cost to serve benefit. So that was, coming up with that hypothesis and then starting to design what that end-to-end service would look like and how do you interact with the teams to both build it, test it, and then, the deployment piece.
And so what was the big challenges? And so it sounds great on the front of it.
Yeah.
You'd think, okay, application is application is application. Obviously, there'll be some differences, some modules that are different along the way. But let's go dig into the meat of it. What happened?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing you have to overcome with kicking this off is the fear factor. As I said, that the teams are thinking, I hate my current system. None of them love the current system. But if you build me something new, you might take half of my team away. So just the feeling in that room was always very tense. And I think we had to keep reinforcing that, look at the numbers. The numbers are growing. And what we're saying is instead of doubling your team, you might only need to grow your team by 5 or 6%. And that's probably a good thing for the business. The other thing is we also used to use a lot of temps. So we'd have peaks and troughs in our onboarding. And so that one of the benefits would be we'd get away from the temps. So it was a lot of it was about establishing the motive that we're not here to slash and burn. We're actually here to just make our whole business more efficient and to make your lives easier, because you just don't like your current system. So we're going to make something that you might actually enjoy using. So we did surveys. We actually surveyed them and, we would ask them questions about their current experience and we'd use that as a benchmark. So as we were testing and validating with them, we would be surveying the users to see, to kind of prove back to them that actually this is better than the old way. And you told us that. So that's one element. The second aspect was to try and find the commonality. And one of the challenges, and I think this is the case in most organizations, is those people in those teams, those admin teams, are wanting to give you the requirements. This is how it needs to work, because we need to have this type of user flow for apprenticeship A and this type of user flow for apprenticeship B, because they're so wedded into their depth of knowledge around a particular type of, in this case, apprenticeship. What we could see, being somewhat sort of abstracted from it, was actually, for all intents and purposes, they were the same thing. And we could see a way to allow the system to deal with the business logic so that we didn't need specialized users in the admin team to deal with that. So that how they used to work was the manager would get the applications and the manager would allocate a specific type of application to a specific person in the team because they had expertise around, maybe it was an accountancy apprenticeship or a financial services.
Jimmy, you do this one. Jennifer, you do that one.
So again, you can see where the inefficiencies in that, because maybe Jimmy has 10 and Joanna has 5. And so, we're not getting the most out of the people. We saw through the design process that actually you could standardize all of that. I mean, we talk about real basic stuff. They used to have to take documents in sort of via email and upload them individually for all the individual students. And what we did was build a system that allows the students to upload the documents themselves. So we just took that work away and we did validation of the documents on upload to make sure there were no errors, because in the old days, the team had to check the documents manually and go back to the learner. So once you start to change all of that, you don't need specialisms anymore. You don't need someone who knows the difference between an accountancy qualification and a law qualification, because the system can check that for them. So that was the next big challenge, was to say, okay, well, we've actually automated all of this for you. So now you can go from having Jimmy and Joanna to having just their queues, to having an automated queue where the manager doesn't even need to think about it anymore.
It's more Kanban. It's just the next one served.
Just take the next one served. And every aspect of the workflow had changes like that. So brilliant, but it's like going from, living on Mars to living on the moon. I mean, the change was so dramatic for them. And so we anticipated when it came to rollout that was going to be really challenging.
So I've worked in operational and admin heavy businesses where we've gone through a change like this. And at times I've either recruited people from those teams to become associate product managers and be part of the team. In fact, some of my favorite people came from help desk because they really empathized with the problem. They knew what the solutions were, but we taught them the processes of how to do this responsibly and not just fix the one thing and change. We've also done things like I was in a supermarket chain, and we would bring in store staff for workshops and run things with them, not because we were going to build exactly what they said, but getting them participating, and it helped articulate all the problems really well. And then they would get the buy-in because they'd say, oh, wow, you can do this? That actually solves my problem even better. And they would go back and advocate.
Absolutely.
So were you taking approaches like that?
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing was to get the manager on the journey, the manager of that team. And it did take, she was getting a lot of pressure from her team, a lot of the kind of fear. But, we got her embedded into the process and got her bought into seeing the future, what the future could look like, get her excited. You know, that it's visioning, right? Like how great is this going to be when you don't have to worry about one individual being sick and that whole list of applications stopping, because now we're building flexibility. So getting her on board with the benefits and getting her then becoming an advocate for the change. And then one of the challenges with embedding people is they still have their day job to do. And so the way that we mitigated that was to, in our budget, to cover the backfill with temps. So we've said, we're the development team, we're CapEx, so we can cover the operating costs of your team by giving you you might need 2 temps to backfill one of your good people.
One experienced person.
But let's do that so that we can free them up to, exactly to your point, to they're an expert in the types of things that they might see day to day, but getting them to become an advocate and to really sort of participate in the development, but also to become a super user of the new product. So that was definitely something that worked really well for us. Still going from 1 or 2 users into a team of 15 was challenging, but that's where that product ops team came in, because they sort of went and sat with that team and observed how they were using it and would give them feedback. And as you can imagine, when you deploy that product, it doesn't live up to your expectations. It takes a few weeks. They need to get used to it. They need to adjust their own ways of working. They need to realize they don't need to just stick to that one case. They can work on multiple cases. And that takes a bit of, reminding and looking at the data, looking at who's processing more cases than another person and giving them that feedback. So being able to look at the data essentially and work with the individuals and the manager to optimize the outcome.
Hey, Lily, you're the CPO for a product that's just in English. What's holding you back from going multilingual?
Well, in short, it's expensive and hard, and we just don't have the team to manage it.
Okay, so this is where I love AI. Today's podcast sponsors Transifex, that's TRANSIFEX, have used AI to solve this problem and help organizations scale and grow into more markets. They help teams build and automate the localization process in a way that just works. And it can sync with tools like Figma and Jira, saving a lot of time for designers, developers, and marketers.
I see that their API would let us upload content, translate, and publish seamlessly, so multilingual updates roll out with every release. Their AI-powered translations keep everything sounding native, not robotic, and you can create and manage your own custom glossary, keeping everything on brand.
It's how you cut time to market, stay ahead of competitors, and delight users worldwide. You can try Transifex free for 15 days. Just head to transifex.com, that's TRANSIFEX.com, and make global growth simpler than ever.
So the first time they're seeing this is when it's been built and deployed, or are they seeing paper prototypes?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. We had Figma prototypes for sure. So yes, design, testing, with mock-ups, and then testing with sections as it went live. A lot of the concern was around the data because they'd been used to, as I said, they were downloading documents from email and looking at the documents, and there was this fear that if they weren't checking the documents, that there would be a regulatory risk. And again, we kind of had to say, well, that's on us, and sort of, again, prove it to them. And doing that through the beta testing was able them to say, oh, actually, yeah, like it did check all of this automatically. It did validate against the rule set. I can start to not worry about it. Took a bit of time before they felt completely calm with that. But yes.
And are you doing this with all application types and all teams at once, or are you doing this with pilot and lighthouse teams first?
Yeah, no, impossible to do them with all at once. So my approach was do the hardest one first. My teams were like, let's do domestic UK because it's really easy. There's only, let's say, 5 sections to the application and we could deploy it really quickly. And I went, no, what's the hardest one? Apprenticeships. That's the one we're going to do. Because if you can solve for the hardest one, the other ones will follow quickly, is my philosophy. So that's what we did. We started with apprenticeships. That took us about almost a year to actually bringing it out into production. We had multiple sort of testing stages, alpha, beta, etc. But it went fully live with learners after a year. But then the domestic took 3 months and international took about 3 months after that. So super quick because, we'd done the heavy lifting with the first version. And also in terms of that rollout, we didn't just switch it on for 100%. We did cohorts because actually it wasn't just about the learners that were changing. The admin team sort of had to change immediately, but also the schools that these learners were working in also had to adopt their ways of working. So we decided to do it school by school. So technology, nursing, healthcare, finance. And we did it in stages like that because those groups of learners were segmented for their onboarding. And you tend to onboard only once or twice a year with those particular learner types. So we were able to get all of them done in stages within a few months so that by the time the next cohort come around, we were all on the new system. So there was a lot of planning around what's the optimum way to roll out, to minimize impact, to all of that. Yeah, really challenging. But
when something only happens once or twice a year, you can't really be completely iterative about this. You're trying a big bang thing, and then you've got quite a while before the changes roll out.
Yeah, I mean, we did a lot of dummy applications because we've got real world application data, so we were able to test it pretty thoroughly. We were pretty confident. I mean, we timed it so that we had a cohort that was quite small in the first phase, so that again gave you the confidence to keep going. Yeah, I don't recall there being any major showstoppers. The biggest challenge for us, again, most product teams will face this, is that whilst we were building it, our regulator changed the rules. And we had to introduce something. So we designed the system. I think we estimated we would save about 25% of our time in the admin team processing these applications. And I think that went from 45 minutes to 30 minutes for processing time per application over the lifetime of the application. And then our regulator said, now you need to have a physical check of every ID of every applicant. And the only way that they could do that was to do it over a phone call where the student would hold up their passport or their driver's license. So suddenly we had to have a 30-minute. So we went from 45 minutes to 30 minutes, but then we had to add 30 minutes for a phone call to do the checks. So the good thing was I could still articulate to the business that we were delivering value, but the team was going to have to grow because of these calls. So, of course, we solve it with technology.
But this thing would have happened regardless, so that you would have had to add it 30 minutes regardless. You moved on to an hour 15, now it's only an hour. So you're still saving 15 minutes. The percentage just doesn't look as
But
good.
we knew we could save that 30 minutes as well. And what we did, we introduced ID verification. So we added a new, it was an iteration. We didn't hold the release for that, but we did a fast follow where we added, we used on Fido when we brought in ID verification for 80% of the applications, we could get rid of the call.
And now you're going from 75 to 30 minutes and you look even better.
We look even better. So it's great. But it's like for any team, right? If your major requirements change or, regulation or whatever it is, that you just have to adapt. It's a good thing about being agile.
So this is all sounding fantastic. We've been talking about, teams that focus on the front end and teams that focus on the internal tool. What you're talking about is something where some of this is applicant facing, some of this is school facing, some of this is ops facing. So you've got multi-dimensions. How are you trying to stack all this together? Is it one team looking at the full stack of this, or are there different teams taking different aspects?
We tried to just stick with one team, and even then, the back end and the front end. The back end is our student information system, which is Salesforce, or it's what we decided to go with. We had some data in Salesforce and some data in an external system, and we just decided to put it all into Salesforce, which would allow us to just have one tool for the admin team. But then there's not just the learners, but you also have line managers. So the line manager, because it's an apprenticeship, the line manager is another actor in the ecosystem. And so we had to involve line managers who come from the clients. But of course, the clients don't really want to give you their line managers to be part of your workshop. It was really, really hard to speak to line managers. And we were lucky that we have a couple of key clients who wanted to partner with us on that. But there's a lot of fear, I think, in a B2B business about exposing product development to clients. It's a falsehood, but I do think that companies feel vulnerable if they show unfinished products to B2B clients. Like they'll see something that's not perfect and they'll say, well, that's not going to work for us. So we might, not be happy with them as a provider. I think that's mad. And I take the cup half full view where that a client's going to see it as a positive engagement that we want to engage with them, to hear from them and to build products around their needs. So it took it wasn't culturally anything that BPP had done before. They just, technology teams don't talk to clients, and we had to change that. And it just took a lot of begging and pleading and asking, could we find at least one client that we know is really friendly to us that would work with us?
Yeah, the key is finding the right clients, isn't it, and doing an advisory council type approach.
Yeah. And, asking them if we can talk about it. Would they like to, blog about it with us? And there was always going to be one or two clients who were really enthusiastic about it, and it was brilliant to get them involved. And then once word got out that we'd involved some clients, the other clients all wanted to be involved. And suddenly we had a great set of users. But that was one of the challenges, is to get the involvement of the line manager. But then it became apparent. So we had the back office side Salesforce. So we needed a Salesforce team on it. We had the kind of user view, which was the main team. But then the line manager view, it was going to be too complex for the user-facing team to build that. So we have to add another team. So we ended up having 3 development teams working on this, and that's a nightmare to have dependency management, but they worked pretty well, and we managed that through Scrum of Scrums and not having too many stories in a sprint, so that they're all working kind of one thing together, and we could do integration testing as we went along. So we got there, but now we've managed to get it back down to primarily one team who can manage the whole thing end to end.
Okay, that leads into a nice question, potentially a leading question, actually.
All right.
So you've done this once successfully. Is this a process that you then do again and use the same process, or is process the most important part of this, or is it
I think the way of working, certainly. We, to be truthful, this kind of product operations team, go-to-market team, I've never really had that before. It was just something that I figured was really letting me down, because we used to rely purely on the people within the organization to manage the change. And this is an awful saying, you might want to cut it out, but sometimes turkeys don't vote for Christmas, right? And so
That's not an awful saying. No, we're keeping that in.
But you know what I mean? Like sometimes, whilst it's good for you, you don't want to take the medicine. And that it was just easier to say, we're going to embed someone from our team in your team, and you need to take their advice with and kind of listen to the data that's showing you where maybe you're not maximizing the value, and work with us to maximize the value. And a big part of that was the CEO saying to the other execs, who are my peers, you are just as accountable as Jo's team for the success of these products, because they're being built for your teams, right? So if your teams aren't coming on the journey, I'm holding you accountable as much as the product team. And that was good, because they all bought into that. They got it, that we're not the Field of Dreams. We don't just build it and they come. It's a joint effort to get this thing to be really successful. So having that senior leader buy-in for the teams that were affected, and having a plant who were in there, making sure that things were working as efficiently and as effectively as possible, was the process that we practiced and we got really good, and now we're doing it in other areas of the business.
Yeah, I totally agree that getting that buy-in and the leadership to say that. I've never seen change work effectively when people aren't held accountable to
100%, yeah.
But from the other side, of having the plants and teams, in my experience, it takes a special kind of person to make that work.
It does.
To not feel like an invader, to be able to communicate in the right language. And what did you learn about them, or what did they learn about how to be effective with the teams that they were working with?
The particular person who I've hired as my head of product ops, I've worked with him before, and he was a product manager, senior product manager at a previous company. But he went off and did an MBA and really loved the change management, operations management piece of that. And so when I left my previous company and I was thinking of this particular role, I just knew that because he understands product and he's got all of this kind of really good foundation academically around change management, if he could put those two things together, he'd be perfect for this job. And I was right, which is great. And so, yeah, I think you need to have the kind of authority of knowing what you're doing. This isn't just telling people to change, it's showing them why the change benefits them. And you do that both through the data and through, kind of influencing skills. And he's also a very calm person, really good kind of demeanor, very, investing time with people, spending time with people. It's just that the human element is key, right? At the end of the day, building those relationships. These people were based in Manchester, we're based in London, so he would go up and spend time with them. All of that really helped make it successful.
One of the things you said yesterday at the leadership forum that I really loved was a very simple phrase and something you said you'd learned a while back about stop being defensive. What did you mean by that? How does that come into play?
I mean, it's throughout my life. I think it's really normal that all product people, when you build something, you're very protective of it. It's your baby, right? And sometimes you don't actually put yourself in the user's shoes. So whilst you might have hit 80% of what they needed, the 10, 20% that you haven't hit could really affect their attitude towards what you've built, their positivity, and it could be a minor thing for you to change. So I think it's quite natural sometimes for product teams to just dismiss some of the feedback that probably is quite minor, but that could make a big impact to your success if it becomes a mental blocker for the end user. It might be a consumer, it could be, in this case, internal people. So I think that nature to defend what you've built is, but look, it's amazing. Okay, yeah, it is, but it could be even better if we added a couple of things, or we at least took the time to understand where there are challenges that may be still remaining. And so I think, yeah, for various reasons throughout my career, I probably have, or it could even come from the team just being so busy that you don't want to hear it. It's like, I don't need this right now. I don't need to hear about what you want for iteration 2 and iteration 3. Just let me focus on iteration 1. So anything like that, that's kind of, these are the common product behaviors, I think, where you come across as being defensive for all, probably valid reasons, but it doesn't help you win over hearts and minds of the people that you're trying to sort of ship products with. So I've just learned to just take all feedback, like good feedback, bad feedback. You don't necessarily need to do anything about it, but being defensive is definitely not a winning strategy.
Yeah. Well, I think we've got time for one more question on this, Jo. Maybe two. I'm going to jump in with this one. You're at BPP, you're the Chief Product and Technology Officer.
Yeah.
Is it different being able to do this wearing both hats? Would it be significantly harder, you think, if you were only doing the product hat?
I think so. It's not always the case, but often the CTO and the CPO come from different places. And then if they're not reporting, if the CEO, they're reporting to a CEO or some other role that doesn't really understand the CTO and the CPO, there might be a chief strategy officer or a chief operating officer who brings things to a conclusion. And unfortunately, too many times I've seen a conflict of outcomes and alignment, lack of alignment around what the teams are trying to achieve. And so there ends up being friction. And so for me, I sort of gave myself the job title. The investors asked me to, and the CEO, said, this is what we want. And I said, well, that's fine. Yeah, it's a combination of product and technology. That's the job title. So they didn't really have any issue with it. For me, I was asked by several of my peers in the industry, like, wow, you're taking on technology. That's massive. I've been working in and out of tech for many years. I have an engineering background, so I've done some coding in my life. I'm not at all anywhere capable of doing what the guys on my team do, guys and girls, but I understand enough to influence and make decisions around security, scalability, performance, cost, languages, which languages to use. I look at it from a business perspective. You want to go for things where there's lots of developers out there. You don't want to use the latest and greatest where you're going to have to pay a fortune for the most expensive engineers. So I factored those things into making decisions around engineering, but I had to hire a brilliant director of engineering, which I did do. And, that next layer down was critical. But yeah, I think it's helped me be more successful because I could always look holistically at what we needed to do. And I'm really there defending the need for engineering time to do things like ways of working, developer experience. So I could see that the more we invested in developer experience was going to pay back to the product teams because it would make the teams faster. And I think having one person who can see both sides of that, sometimes you have to invest a little more here to get payback later. And that might mean less product now, but more product later. It's a good to have one person who can make those trade-offs.
Yeah, being able to slow down to speed up, to knowing how to make those trade-offs, what's the right prioritization at any time.
Yeah.
It's incredibly hard.
It is hard, but it's also, it does make it easier. And I think that you can always swing it in one direction or the other. And sometimes we've had to do that. But the other element of that is making sure that those directors, so I have that sort of amigos model where I have a director of engineering, director of product, director of data, director of design. I also have a director of data science and AI because it's so critical at the moment. That leadership group, they're like family, and I, make them work as one, really invest in them to build that relationship, because that's where that's where the magic happens, and if they're aligned, everything else works brilliantly. So, yeah.
Jo, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Randy.
The Product Experience hosts are me, Lily Smith, host by night and Chief Product Officer by day.
And me, Randy Silver, also host by night. And I spend my days working with product and leadership teams, helping their teams to do amazing work.
Luran Pratt is our producer and Luke Smith is our editor.
And our theme music is from product community legend Arnie Kittler's band, POW. Thanks to them for letting us use their track.